So, exercise and asthma. Exercise is one of my favorite subjects. You know, I had a long career as a professional dancer, starting in ballet, and I taught fitness, which is how I got into health, and it's a long story. But anyway, let's take a look at this very handsome gentleman here. Does anybody recognize him? This is from Dancing with the Stars, season 24, and it's Rashad Johnson. He had a career as a NFL running back. He was Dancing with the Stars champion, and he's been asthmatic since childhood. And he was interviewed a few years ago on living with asthma, and he said, "I was 10 years old when I had my first asthma attack. I'll never forget it. I was playing on the monkey bars with my friends, and I fell to the ground. I was dependent on an inhaler daily, and it prevented me from running and other activities. After my second major asthma attack when I was 13, I was hospitalized and nearly died. I couldn't breathe. I strengthened my lungs little by running. I also improved my diet. For the past 10 years, I haven't had any asthma symptoms. I haven't had to use inhalers. I live a very healthy life." You're going to see stories of 3 other athletes who, through grit and determination and following their doctor's treatment orders, did very well and have greatly reduced their asthma symptoms and become star athletes. Okay, Jackie Joyner Kersey, and if you remember, some of you are old enough to remember her, she's considered one of the 50 greatest athletes of all time of any gender. She was an amazing track and field champion, and she had severe asthma as a child, and she won 6 Olympic medals. So there were 3 gold medals. She was voted Female Athlete of the 20th Century by Sports Illustrated for women. ESPN was the one that considered her one of the 50 greatest athletes of all time. And her world record of 7,291 points in the women's heptathlon is still standing. It's been a very long-standing record. She is also a humanitarian. She came from a poor background herself, and she wanted to help aspiring athletes. So she established the JJK Foundation, which is dedicated to ensuring that all children have access to high-quality after-school programs, safe recreational places within their communities, and caring adults to help them achieve their dreams. And we've seen in many studies, it is so helpful to poor children especially to have the programs right on site in the schools, because transportation is an issue, cost is an issue. So there've been a lot more of these programs started, but unfortunately we had a bit of a setback in COVID where everybody was more sedentary than usual. So she was also interviewed on how she succeeded, and she said the key is to learn to control your asthma. She said, "I was always told as a young girl that if you had asthma, there was no way you could run, jump, or do the things that I was doing athletically. It took me a while to even start taking my medication properly, to do the things that the doctor was asking me to do. I just didn't want to believe that I was an asthmatic. But once I stopped living in denial, I got my asthma under control, and I realized that it is a disease that can be controlled." So there we're seeing a very eloquent description of some of the barriers, especially when kids get to be middle school, high school. They don't want to look different, they don't want to use an inhaler, and so forth. Christy Yamaguchi, she was a figure skating gold medalist. Beautiful skater. She won the gold medal. She was actually the first Asian American woman to win the gold medal in figure skating. She is also a Dancing with the Stars champion before Rashad Johnson, and she has had asthma since she was a child. She was born with other things too. Believe it or not, she was born with a club foot and had to wear braces and took up skating to strengthen her ankles and feet. It's almost hard to believe, but again, determination, grit, and enormous talent. And she's also been diagnosed with asthma since she was a child. She is now a mother, a children's book author, and founder of another foundation to help children, the Always Dream Foundation. This empowers children to reach their dreams through education and inspiration. And in 2011, she became a spokesperson for the American Lung Association as an advocate for those with chronic illnesses. One more, I hope you're getting inspired. Amy Van Dyken, she was an Olympic swimming champion, severely asthmatic. In fact, her doctor suggested as a young child she was having such asthma flare-ups that she take up a sport as a way to strengthen her lungs and prevent future asthma attacks. At 6 years old, she decided she wanted to be a swimmer, but she had such impairment at that point, it took her another 6 years to finally be able to swim the full length of the pool. And she went on to control her asthma, and through, again, hard work, determination, she went on to win 6 gold medals in 2 Olympics. She was named Swimming World's American Swimmer of the Year in 1995 and 1996. So why am I telling you about these athletes? Because I think sometimes we use our condition, asthma, cystic fibrosis, COPD, allergies, whatever it may be. We all have something, and we use it as an excuse to not exercise or to refrain from doing things. And is it reasonable to have some fear? Yes. Can those fears be quelled with proper management? Yes, they can. So first, before we talk about starting an exercise program if you have asthma, I would like to talk about physical fitness and where we stand as a nation. Unfortunately, the news is not too good. And these statistics were right before COVID, so it's gotten worse. I was shocked by the first statistic, not by the numbers, but by the fact that adolescents are in worse shape than adults. Only 1 in 4 adults, 25% of adults, and 1 in 5 adolescents, or 20% of adolescents in the US, meet the physical activity guidelines for aerobic and muscle strengthening activities. There have been significant increases in sedentary time, particularly screen time among youth, and I can certainly vouch for that because I teach both college students and early college admission 15 and 16-year-olds. And a number of the 15 and 16-year-olds, we started a healthy behavior journal, change journal, and a lot of them, their behavior they wanted to change was getting off their phones because they were on TikTok till 3 a.m. on their phone doing TikTok. So one of them said, "I give it to my sister." Like, okay. Others turned it off, had alerts. It's become almost an obsession, and it is an obsession with some teenagers. So a recent urban study found that children with asthma reported almost 10 more hours of out-of-school screen time per week than did those without asthma. Remember, this is before COVID. That's a lot of hours, 35 hours a week. It's gone up significantly. We're still waiting for all the data from COVID to come through, but there was one study done by the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which did say they found that COVID-19 led to a decrease in physical activity. I mean, kids were sitting in front of their screens rather than going to school. And there was an increase in sedentary behavior by children and young adults, which in turn led to a decrease in cardiopulmonary exercise performance. These doctors that did the study were concerned. They said we should do future studies to see if we're back to before the pandemic. And remember, before the pandemic, 1 in 5 adolescents was doing the recommended amount of exercise, so it's even worse than that. So that's a pretty serious problem. The good news is it can be rectified without a great expenditure of money. So before we talk about what kind of exercise to do, how you get fit, we have to know what the guidelines are. We always have to start with what are the guidelines. So the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, 2nd edition, goes through the lifespan. So starting with preschoolers, kids aged 3 to 5, the recommendation is just to be physically active throughout the day and to encourage the caregivers or preschool teachers to give them activities where they're active throughout the day. That might seem like a no-brainer, but I know some teachers would like to do crafty activities and sit on the floor, and that's fine. They also need to get up and do physical activity because it becomes a habit. You know, if you're very active, it becomes a habit. If you're very sedentary, that becomes a habit, and habits are hard to break, right? It takes a real effort. Now, for school-age children and adolescents, age 6 through 17, they should do at least an hour or more of moderate to vigorous physical activity daily, primarily moderate or vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity, as well as muscle strengthening activity at least 3 times a week. I will go into more detail about what constitutes moderate versus vigorous in just a few moments. The recommendations for adults, which might seem like a lot, but it's really not, is 150 to 300 minutes a week of moderate intensity, or 75 to 150 minutes a week of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity, or an equivalent combination of the two. As well, they recommend that adults do muscle strengthening activities of moderate or vigorous intensity at least twice a week. Now for older adults, seniors, it's interesting. For the first time, I taught gerontology last semester. I'm a health educator and professor. And it's interesting how different cultures have very different attitudes toward aging. There was a movie that showed this feature documentary that was made on Japanese in Okinawa. where they're fully integrated into the community. They folk dance in costumes, they fly kites, they exercise, and it was utterly amazing what even the old, there are 3 levels of old from 65 to the 90s. The old, those in their mid 80s to 90s, were exercising, and it wasn't considered weird, or they weren't considered in danger of hurting themselves. Everybody loved it and applauded it. And my favorite part of that documentary was they had these robo-pets that ran around, they had good facial expressions, they exercised with their pets. I'm sure they weren't cheap, but I wanted one, they're really cute. Anyway, so older adults should exercise. They should have a multi-component exercise plan that includes balance training, aerobic exercise, and muscle strengthening activity. They may need some modifications, such as exercising sitting down, but I have to say, I lived in Boca Raton for a few years, and it seems like there are hundreds of classes for seniors, in pools and chair yoga, and my mother-in-law was going to all these classes, and other people I knew. So there's really no excuse in Florida. There's so many different classes. The aqua aerobics for seniors is very popular, and you weigh less in the pool, so if you have a bad knee or something, it takes the strain off your ankle, your knee. There are many, many classes. But before we start, we always have to check with the doctor. So let's look at why we're not fit. Let's look at how we spend our time during the day. And this was done before COVID, so again, it has gotten worse. So watching TV is the largest category. And we can watch it in so many different ways now with streaming and all that. So 2 hours and 47 minutes. Socializing and communicating is 41 minutes. That is largely sitting. These days we mostly do things sitting down on our phones, our iPads, FaceTime, and older adults might be playing cards or mahjong or something like that. Most things are kind of sitting. So playing games, using the computer for leisure, that's also sitting. Relaxing and thinking is sitting. Other leisure activities, for the most part, are also seated. So the only one where you're definitely not seated and you're actually active is that purple one, participating in sports, exercise, and recreation. 18 minutes. And this includes the full week, even the weekend. 18 minutes a day. No wonder we're not very fit as a nation. We have to change our priorities and put physical activity on our schedule. So what are the barriers? Okay, it's bad enough that the nation as a whole is really not fit, but when you have asthma, you're adding another complication. So what are some of the barriers to exercise if you have asthma? Well, adults who have exercise-induced bronchospasm, EIB, or exercise-induced asthma may refrain from exercise, including sports, because they fear triggering an exacerbation. Whereas parents of asthmatic children may be afraid to allow their children to participate in sports. I had a student this past semester that said, I don't know what to do, I've gained so much weight, my mother would never let me do sports, and I'm afraid to try anything. And I had her come on the home visiting work group and hear one of the presentations that was relevant to that, and she thanked me. It is possible to exercise even with severe asthma under a doctor's supervision with pre-treatment, as we'll see in a moment. But there is fear, which is understandable. Nobody wants to go out, run, and have an exacerbation. When you get to the adolescents, there are other barriers because they want to fit in with their peers. They don't want to take out their inhaler. They don't want to admit that they might have a disease. They don't want to look different. They might be teased by some of their fellow students. Now, in poor neighborhoods, there are additional barriers. Poor urban neighborhoods may lack recreational facilities and green spaces for outdoor exercise. I've seen that in New York City. Many schools do not even have any outdoor areas to exercise during recess. That is an opportunity for kids to work off some steam, run around, play ball, do something. Lack of money can also be a barrier for poor children participating in sports or dance classes, as equipment and training can be expensive. Even basketball, which, you can just shoot hoops, you still need you need good shoes and you need coaching. But if you're doing something like dance class or figure skating or hockey, the costs, you have to get to the rink, you have to go to the studio, it adds up. Transportation to the facility where you're going to be doing the workout or the sport also may be an issue for families that have one parent and that might be at work or maybe both parents work, they might not have a car or the time to transport the child to practice. So let's look at the positives now. Why should we exercise? What are the benefits of exercise for individuals with asthma? Well, I looked at meta-analyses of RCTs and interventions that were done at different ages. So let's start with children. So the studies of children who participate in exercise interventions showed that the children showed consistent improvements in fitness, asthma symptoms, and quality of life. Not in all studies, but in some studies, the children also showed improvements in lung function. So it was a very positive association between exercise and improvements in their quality of life and their asthma symptoms. Asthmatic adults who participated in aerobic exercise showed improvements in asthma control and lung function. Unless you think these are all like marathon runners, no, it was moderate exercise, nothing extreme at all. Something that the average adult could undertake even if he or she had never done sports of any kind. Aerobic exercise also helps to prevent obesity, and we know, we heard it earlier today, obesity is significantly associated both with the development of asthma in children and with the worsening of asthma symptoms once you're diagnosed with asthma. So that helps to prevent it. And of course, obesity is also associated with diabetes too, and certain kinds of cancer, cardiovascular disease. And if you become obese as a child, it's so much harder to get rid of it as you're an adult. So if you establish good eating and exercise habits as a child, we do unfortunately tend to gain weight as we get older. So you don't want to start that when you're a kid. It's bad enough that it happens when you're middle-aged, right? So aerobic exercise can help with that. It improves your cardiorespiratory endurance, your VO2 max, how efficiently your body can use oxygen when you're exercising. Aerobic exercise and strength training help to prevent sarcopenia. I mentioned that earlier while we were setting up here. Sarcopenia is associated with reduced mobility and increased risk of falls and fractures, and I have a slide on that coming up next. Exercise reduces the risk of developing other chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and osteoporosis. And exercise makes you feel good. It releases those endorphins, the neurotransmitters that promote a sense of well-being and satisfaction, kind of a natural high. Exercise improves your posture and your appearance, which can boost your self-esteem. And finally, exercise improves your quality of life throughout the lifespan, even among those in their 80s and 90s. I want to be like that man in Okinawa who was pushing 100 years old and chasing after his kite. It's like, I could not believe it. But he remained active outside, and of course the Japanese diet is very low in fat compared to our diet, so they don't have as many problems with obesity over there. They showed what the seniors were eating. It was amazing and very attractively displayed too, so looked good. Between that and the robo-pets, I'm telling you, it was very appealing. Okay, so let's look at this research study in Korea. It was on sarcopenia. Again, I'm sure most of you know this, but it is the gradual loss of muscle mass, strength, and function related to aging. It is not a given that when you get old, you're going to get it. Not at all. You can prevent it. It is one of the most common causes, loss of mobility in elderly people, which leads to a significant decline in their quality of life, increasing the risk of falls and fractured bones. I know my mother has suffered from this, and she's in a wheelchair now. She's had so many falls. The Korean National Health and Nutrition Survey, Kay and Haynes, examined a geriatric community dwelling population of 4,116 individuals for which they had prevalence on asthma, sarcopenia, and level of physical activity. The whole body composition was measured using dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. Physical activity was assessed using the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, and they looked at the MET level of each activity times the minutes of activity times the times per week. And I'm going to talk more about METs in a moment so you know what that is. The asthmatics that had sarcopenia had a lower FEV1, more obstructive patterns, and lower physical activity levels, as well as more exacerbations and hospitalizations compared to those without sarcopenia. So these findings suggest that decreased muscle mass and physical activity levels contribute to reduced lung function in elderly asthmatics. And putting it positively, you can prevent this if you exercise. You don't have to have sarcopenia as you age. So what do? You have asthma and you want to start exercise. You have not done it for a while or maybe never. First step, see your healthcare provider. That is super important. Get a full physical. Go over your written asthma action plan. My doctoral research was on asthma management among college students, and I had none other than Dr. Dave Evans chairing my expert panel. And he said, you must have a written asthma action plan. That was in our instrument that we developed to measure the adequacy of asthma management. And he is one of the primary experts in the country, one of the premier experts. And he's right. If you don't write things down, things get sort of changed in translation. If it's written down, everybody that looks at it, whether they're the coach at sports, a pulmonologist, a camp director, they all are looking at the same plan and they know what's going on. So go over your asthma action plan, talk to your provider about the type of exercise you're planning to undertake. Be realistic. Sometimes people pick a sport because their boyfriend's doing it, their girlfriend's doing it, their cousin's doing it. Pick something you like that you can do. Don't pick something that you know is going to be not a very successful undertaking. All right, and also that you can afford, that's doable, that is in your area, available. So after you do that, also consider how it's going to affect your asthma. Some sports are more asthma friendly than others. In general, sports that require short bursts of energy, such as sprinting, baseball, figure skating, and football, are easier on the lungs than long distance events. Hiking and brisk walking are good choices for just about any age. Swimming may be a good choice because the air is warm and humid, provided that your airways are not impacted by the chlorine. So ask your healthcare provider about pre-treatment with medications to prevent EIB and exercise-induced asthma flare-ups. Make sure that your physician updates your asthma action plan to include his or her recommendations as to which medication is best for you, the correct dosage, and when to administer it. Follow what the physician or nurse practitioner tells you. Step 2. And this is the first part of this is good for all people, regardless of whether they have asthma. Do a warm-up and a cool-down. Should be 5 to 10 minutes of each when you exercise. I like to think of exercise, which I've taught fitness for years, as a plateau. So your warm-up is like that. You get to plateau. You're working at a moderate or vigorous intensity, whatever you decide, and then you cool down. I have seen people, young people, just get out and run. No warm-up. They just get out in the cold air. They're running, and then they just get back, into the train or car or whatever without a cool down. It's not good for you. I used to teach at John Jay College, and we had a lot of guys from the police academy, and they were very butch and macho and all this stuff. You have to warm up, cool down, properly hydrate, wear proper clothes. And if you have asthma, it's even more important. Make sure you warm up, make sure you cool down. Wear proper workout clothes. That sounds like a no-brainer. It's not. I've seen people, especially dancers, wearing these rubber sweatpants to try and lose weight. That's a good way to get really dehydrated and overheated. And if you get dehydrated, your electrolyte balance might be off and you could possibly cause a flare-up. So wear workout clothes that are cotton or spandex or something that absorbs your perspiration. Stay well hydrated, particularly in warm weather. It's pretty hot out there today. Florida gets mighty hot, so make sure you drink lots of water. We have lots of masks now, so this isn't as hard as it was a few years ago. Wear a face covering when you're exercising in cold weather so that doesn't go right into your lungs. And again, I said it before, but I'll say it again. Follow your healthcare provider's pre-treatment as described in your asthma action plan. Don't be creative and do whatever you want. Follow the plan, okay? And talk to your healthcare provider if your symptoms persist when you exercise. It's possible they might be caused by non-asthma related conditions, or you may need additional medication. Okay, so let's talk about how we exercise. Because again, I have found traditionally people greatly overestimate how much they exercise. I used to live in the Village in New York, and I see this woman running by like this. Literally, I'd walk right by her and I thought, why is she running? She might as well just brisk walk because you're not getting much benefit out of running like that. And she was young, she's in her 20s. Like, why is she doing that? It's crazy. Okay, so don't pretend you're jogging, you know, like this is continuous exercise, but it's not cardiorespiratory endurance. It's just your finger. You got to use your big muscles and you got to get it up to an intensity that is workable. So we measure using METs. MET stands for metabolic equivalent, and it's the amount of energy or calories your body uses each minute while you're resting quietly. On average, a man sitting quietly burns 70 calories per hour and a woman 60 calories per hour. I know it's not fair, but what are you going to do? So the MET level is higher as the intensity of your activity increases. So 2.5 METs is the amount of energy used walking leisurely, and that might be appropriate for seniors or people that are having maybe they're recovering from an injury or an illness, but it's up to 5 METs when you're walking briskly at 4 miles per hour. There are 3 levels of activity: light, moderate, and vigorous. The light is less than 3 METs, the moderate is 3 to 6 METs, and the vigorous is greater than 6 METs. And we're going to see activities in each category. Okay, so for light activities, you can see these seniors, they found a nice scenic place. They're walking on the beach, which is always fun. And, you know, it's also great for your calf muscles going on the sand. And they're doing probably a moderate walk. So walking, unless you have, you know, joint problems, is good for most people. Canoeing leisurely, you can see slow ballroom dancing, fishing if you're just standing in one place, golfing with a cart. These are all light activities. Playing catch, playing the piano. Isn't that a good one? You can get to about 2.5 METs just playing the piano. I love that. Sitting quietly, stretching, or walking at a slow pace. Moderate activities. Most of us should strive for moderate to vigorous unless we have serious complications like a bad back or a bad knee or something like that. Most adults should do moderate to vigorous, and young adults should strive definitely to get in the vigorous zone. So there are a lot of moderate activities, and you can see for each category, like basketball, if you're just shooting hoops, it's moderate. If you're playing a competitive game, assuming you're not on the bench the whole time, if you're actually playing the game, it's vigorous, right? Tennis is moderate in doubles, vigorous if it's singles. So dancing, again, depends on how vigorous it is. You have to be honest with yourself, you know, how vigorous your activity is. And also you can measure your heart rate, which I'm going to show how to do in a minute. Hiking, horseback riding, ice skating, kayaking, all in this category. There are a lot of things in this category. You can see volleyball, non-competitive, competitive would be vigorous. Walking, depending how fast you're walking. So you have to know how fast you're walking. I've said this to my students over and over. My favorite was, I had some students when I was teaching in the Bronx. They're like, they had to keep a journal of their exercise. I said, Professor, I walked for 2 hours on the weekend. I said, really? How far did you walk? Oh, I don't know, I was shopping. I said, well, I'm afraid that doesn't count. You're stopping in every store along, you know, Grand Concourse or wherever they were shopping. I'm like, I don't think so. It's not continuous and it's not fast enough. Okay, so, you know, these are ways we try and delude ourselves that we're really exercising. That didn't count. I'm sorry. I said, let's try something else. All right, trampoline. I love that one. Weightlifting, wrestling. Vigorous activities. All right, this is aerobic dance of moderate to high impact. And I'm going to show you how to figure that out in a minute. A basketball game, bicycling at a moderate to quick pace, vigorous calisthenics, competitive football, ultimate frisbee, field or ice hockey, jogging, judo, karate, taekwondo, and lacrosse, all in the vigorous. Racquetball, that's very fast paced. Rollerblading, again, if you're rollerblading like this, you know, no. You gotta know how to rollerblade. Like if you're just learning, it's not vigorous. But once you know how to do it, then it's vigorous. I don't know what's happened to it. It used to be so popular, it's kind of lost its popularity. But I remember when everyone was doing it, my kids, we had rollerblading parties for the kids, you know. Running, cross-country skiing, swimming, soccer, competitive volleyball, singles tennis, stair walking. Stair walking is a good one. Stair walking and jumping rope are good ones, especially for poor kids. I teach kids who are from very poor families, and they're in dangerous neighborhoods, and they're not going to go out in the winter after it's dark and exercise outside, and they don't, not all of them go to gyms. You can do stair walking. A lot of them do stair walking or jump rope. It's something that's very inexpensive. It doesn't require any outlay of fancy equipment or a gym membership, and you can do it. So I wouldn't recommend it for older adults, but for young adults, it's a very good choice. All right, so what are the components of physical fitness? We tend to be hung up on how we look, and if we look good and we're at a good weight, we think we're very fit. We want to sculpt, but that's not necessarily the case. And we can also be a little stocky and be very fit, fitter than a thin person who does not have the requirements of physical fitness. These are the components: cardiorespiratory or aerobic fitness, which is probably the most important, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. So cardiorespiratory fitness is the ability of the circulatory and respiratory system to supply oxygen to the skeletal muscles during any sustained physical activity. How much oxygen can you take in? How long can you keep going? It has to be continuous and use the large muscles and last at least 20 minutes. So these are some examples. Muscular strength is the maximum force you can exert with a single contraction of a muscle or muscle group. And that would be a bench press, leg press, arm curl, knee extension, and knee curl. Those are tests used to measure so you get your baseline where you start. Because when you're figuring out your strength training, do we have any weightlifters out here? Bodybuilders, weightlifters? Okay, so you have to know where you start. We always need a baseline with any activity. Where do you start and then where do you go? And I've had my students keep logs. We all start at our own place, and then the point is to improve. You're not comparing yourself to someone else. They start at a different place. So you can measure what you're able to do. I had somebody who was very weak in my class who could only lift about 15 pounds or something, a man, and he doubled that, over time because he worked hard. So you don't have to be Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And also there are other ways that you can do strengthening exercises. Now, endurance is over time, to repeat rather than a one-time event. So it's high intensity muscle contractions repeated over time. So some of the tests are push-ups. How many push-ups can you do before you stop? Curl-ups, squats, lat pull-down, leg extension, and these core endurance tests. I was doing these myself yesterday. I was just trying it. The trunk flexor endurance is where you're seated like on a table at an incline and you have to support your back. Don't do it if you have a bad back. Side plank on forearm, and the trunk extensor endurance where you're face down and your upper trunk is suspended off the table. So if you go to a gym, again, if you're going to do weights and you haven't done it before, you should do it under the guidance of a trainer at a gym. Don't just do your own thing. But we'll get to that in a moment. Flexibility. Okay, flexibility is not just throwing yourself in the splits, as I've seen people do in dance classes when they come in to show off. It's the range of motion in a specific joint. It's specific to the joint and it's specific to the direction. So, for example, I know I had a rotator cuff thing. It was just, fortunately, just a strain. But so when you're getting physical therapy, they look at the direction. How far can you lift your arm? This way. You reach overhead, and even direction counts. People look at the leg parallel, the leg rotated in different directions. So flexibility is specific to a joint. So people just say, oh, I'm so flexible. It's kind of a misstatement in a way. Flexible how? In what direction? In your hip socket, you can be very flexible in your hips, very tight in your shoulders, for example. And flexibility is really important to prevent injury. Sometimes you see, especially guys, maybe women too, but I used to see the police guys that were training at John Jay, they just wanted to bulk up and they wouldn't really stretch. You have to stretch, warm up before and stretch afterwards so you don't tighten up and get a groin tear or something like that. So it's important. Flexibility should be done, gentle warm up with some gentle stretching before you do your main workout and then deeper stretching after. Some of the measurements, the tests to measure flexibility are the infamous sit and reach, which you probably know. You sit on the floor and reach, shoulder stretch where you try to hold your hands behind your back, and the trunk lift in the prone position. Okay, body composition. This is interesting. Everybody always looks at BMI. BMI is the gold standard of obesity. 18.5 to 24.9, and then 25 to, anyway, we won't go there. 30 and up is obese. 30 and up is considered obese, and the 25 to 30 is overweight. If you're under that, that's good. But it doesn't really say how fit you are. It's only a ratio of your weight to your height. It really doesn't say how fit you are. Body composition is a better rendering of your fitness because it shows what your body is composed of. You could be thin, like an end-stage alcoholic would be very thin and have a really extended belly, I mean, and not weigh very much, and they have awful body composition. So it looks at the lean mass and the fat mass in your body. Lean mass is your muscles, bones, skin, organs, blood. Fat mass is your adipose tissue, which can be subcutaneous, you can pinch the stuff under the skin, or internal. Women have more than men inherently because we have it around our uterus, our breasts. There's something called essential fat, and sometimes it's very sad. I've had bodybuilders where people would actually die because they go below the 3% threshold. You need at least 3% essential fat for men, 11 to 12% for women. The statistics vary depending who you read. In general, the total body fat, essential plus storage, is between 12 and 15 for young men and 25 to 28 for young women. And I'm going to show you a formula where you can calculate it. And this is good because generally speaking, you need fancy equipment. But this is a good calculator, and you will get the slides later. You can work it out for yourself. It's great. You don't need an AirPod or any other fancy equipment to do this. I did it with my students. They absolutely loved it. So you can take a screenshot if you want, and you will get the slides later. Okay, hold on. Gotta get out of this. Oh, dearie me. I lost my slides altogether. Uh-oh. Help. Hold on. There we go. Okay, got it back. All right, so if you do know your body composition, you can look at this chart. The men are on the top, the women are on the bottom, and we did this in my college classes. Okay, so you can see where you fall. It depends on your age. It's a factor of your age as well, because unfortunately our body composition changes with age and not for the better. So you can be pretty fit for your age, but you're going to have a little more body fat than you did when you were 20 if you're now 50, let's say. Okay, the tests that are usually done are done with calipers, hydrostatic, X-ray absorptiometry, bioimpedance, or BOD-POD. The premise behind all of these, but the calipers, is that fat weight and lean weight displace things at a different rate, whether it be air, water, or electric current. The AirPod's really cool. I really want to try one. It looks like a space capsule. Haven't found one yet anywhere I work. All right, so how do you gauge your cardiorespiratory exercise intensity? First, compute your maximum heart rate, 220 minus your age. So a typical college student would be 200, a 20-year-old. Then you look at a formula. This formula posits that you're going to be exercising in the moderate to vigorous range, 64 to 93%. So you multiply your maximum heart rate times those percentages, and you want your target heart rate range to be 128 to 186 beats per minute. And that is a scientific way of calculating it. The less scientific way, but something you can do on the fly, is the talk test. Are you able to talk when you're exercising? If you're having a long conversation, singing and texting your friends, probably it's not intense enough to be doing you too much good. If you're gasping for breath and cannot speak at all, probably you're overexerting yourself. So at a vigorous level of exercise, you can talk, but only in short fragments. And there are exceptions to that, like if you're swimming, you shouldn't be talking at all, right? Okay, at a moderate level, you should be able to converse. The heart rate is the more scientific way of doing it. For muscular strength, resistance training, like weightlifting and bands, you want to do different parts of your body, like upper body and then lower body, with at least a day of rest in between, so you don't overwork your upper body. You'll alternate rather than doing upper body 2 days in a row, so you don't strain your muscles. Core can be done every day. I do 100 crunches a day, and always have. Front, side for the obliques. I don't think you can do too many core exercises because the core supports your whole skeletal frame. It's really important. I know we're running out of time. I've had 2 signs. Flexibility can be incorporated into your other workout in the warm-up and the cool-down. It's really important to prevent injury. These bouncing stretches that were popular like in the 70s are out. It's just a static stretch where you hold it and you breathe. If you can't breathe when you are holding a stretch, back off. You're too deep. You should never be breathless when you're stretching. You should be able to breathe into it. So just back off a little. Maybe you can't. And some days you're more flexible than others. You might not feel well that day. Just back off and do it more gently then. Other considerations: schedule your workouts just like other things that matter to you. Find a workout routine that fits your budget. Wear appropriate workout clothes. These days, I remember years ago, equipment you had to go to a special store, it was expensive. You can get stuff at Walmart and Target or online for really cheap these days. The only thing you shouldn't skimp on is athletic shoes. Get the right kind of shoes for whatever you're doing. Basketball shoes are a lot different than soccer, than aerobic dance, than jogging, and you want the right kind of shoe for what you're doing. Okay, and that is it. So thank you. So I hope I didn't discourage you. I think everybody can exercise, but it's so important to find something you like. And some people, you also have to find your personal style. Some people like to exercise with someone. They go out with a friend, or brother or sister, and others like to do their own thing. Some love classes. They have to go to the Zumba class, whatever the class is, and others are, solo. They like to do their own thing. So find your own personal style when you establish an exercise routine. And really write it down. You can put it on your Google Calendar or whatever you're using. And if you have one of the Fitbits or Apple Watches, it's really easy to track what you're doing, your VO2 max and all that. I'm out of time. Everybody's telling me to stop. Any questions before we finish? Anybody? That's very interesting. I haven't played it yet. I would say, depending how good you are, it's probably moderate. Oh, you think it's vigorous? Yes. Is it? I don't know. I guess it depends who's playing it. If you're really good at it, probably so. Just like if you're playing tennis and you miss the ball all the time, you're spending most of the time shagging the balls, probably it's not vigorous. It depends depends how good you are, right? If you're a great beginner, no, but you're probably right. If you're really good at it, I have some friends that are fanatics. They invited me to go. They went at like 6:30 in the morning on Saturday. I'm like, fine. I don't exercise at 6:30 in the morning. I'm more of a night person. I'd rather exercise at 6:30 at night. So, but anyway, any other questions? Thank you very much. If you should think of anything else, feel free to email me.
Dr. Weiss, that was terrific. Thank you so much.